So, welcome to the Secure Dynamics TechCast. With me, I have two guests. I have a former guest, Krishna Narayan Swamy, who is the CTO and co-founder at Netscope. Welcome back, Krishna.
Thank you.
And I have Max Tomanson, who is the CISO at Apple Bank. Welcome, Max.
Welcome.
So, Max, let's start with you. Fine-grained policy control. This has been something that has always been talked about as one of the big defense mechanisms that is in the tool chest. So, talk a little bit about the philosophy of what fine-grained policy control means today in the context of a CISO and what he or she has to do to protect the environment.
Yes, so to me, it means using multiple products. Unfortunately, we cannot you leverage one product to solve all those issues that we have currently. So fine-grained policies, leveraging multiple products to solve for a problem, right? That, certain things we rely on proxy solutions, certain things we rely on endpoint solutions, and then we put that together and we have one view of the environment. So again, unfortunately, there's no silver bullet in security.
Krishna, what have you seen in your environment?
So what we are observing is specifically from a network security point of view is that customers like Max, they are moving away from what I call course level policy enforcement. So if you looked at the evolution of firewalls to next gen firewalls, you had policies moving from port numbers to application based, right? So I'm going to Facebook, allow or not allow. Or similarly, if you look at secure web gateways, you look at a particular URL, categorize the URL and say, am I allowed to visit that type of category of websites or not, right? To a paradigm where these days users are interacting more with these applications, with the internet, whether it's cloud applications or even websites. So now it comes down to what is the activity that the user is performing. So being able to identify what activity is being performed and what is the data associated with the activity, and then take some policy actions, right? So the mantra has been like, let me not just block my users, but let me enable my users to use these resources out there, but at the same time put some guardrails to ensure that if they try to veer out of the guardrails, then there is a appropriate coaching provided to the user as to why they should not be performing what they should. But it's clearly from going from a course level policy enforcement to much more fine grained at what we say activity and object level policy enforcement.
And Christian, but that's extremely difficult to achieve, right? I mean, as much as we want to move forward and move the needle, and we're going that direction, right? Because there's so many new websites, and so many different attack vectors.
Yep.
It's extremely difficult to. I mean, that's the nirvana for everybody to get to that level, but it's not there yet.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, so definitely I agree with you, Max. Typically, when we look, let's even look at like cloud applications, right? I mean, we are tracking, as you know, over 30,000 cloud applications. But what we see is a long tail, right? So there is definitely a few hundred that are very popular. And so having tight controls on that is beneficial. But for the long tail, at least the approach we have taken is can at least identify data moving activities, people uploading, downloading. And definitely, I mean, there is work to do there, but if we can achieve that, I believe that we can at least reduce the risk surface for our enterprise customers who are adopting this fine grained policy.
Absolutely, and it's about visibility, right? You can't protect everything, so it's a
Right.
visibility that comes after the fact, right? So if an event happens, you can have the visibility and you can rewind the VCR, as I call it, right, or
Yep.
DVR, to look for those abnormalities.
So
Absolutely.
Max, again, going down the path of visibility, right? So is from with the fine-grained enforcement and user level tracking, object level tracking, there's clearly a lot of data that's being collected. So from an operation standpoint, how do you kind of look at the data? Is it like you mentioned after the fact, but also is it an explosion in terms of the amount of data that's being collected and stored, and how long do you keep it, and is that a risk itself?
So yeah, so there's definitely explosion of it, right? So and again, that's why you can't do it by hand, right? So that's why there's other tools in the environment that dig through the data and identify abnormalities. So then we've been working with Krishna and his team to get the data into from that system of record from Netscope to another SIM provider, and then massage the data in there, and then do reporting on top of it, right? Because it's much easier to do that within outside of the Netscope tenant, just because of the duration of data that needs to be kept for our purposes.
So, Krishna, when you kind of start building products, is that something that you also keep in mind in terms of the hygiene of the data and the data creation process itself.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so as Max pointed out, right? I mean, it's it's not only that the data is used for policy enforcement in real time, but it's also for after the fact, right? So towards that end, and we, from our vantage point, we are collecting data from different sources, right? We are getting data from proxies that are proxying traffic. We're getting data from our APIs that make calls into data at rest systems like cloud applications. The interesting thing is, not only is this data, this visibility data, useful for customers like Max to get an idea of what's going on, but also behind the scenes, what we are trying to explore more is how do I correlate the data and identify those anomalous activities that may not have been identified by by policies that have been set up, right? So the goal there is also to identify, use this data to identify unknown behavior patterns that may raise a cause for concern that maybe we should take action on. And almost all customers, as Max pointed out, see the richness of the data. And again, there are various other sources of data in an enterprise, like from on-prem systems, from like AD systems and all that. So the ability to take this data and then correlate it with other sources, right, to even get a much higher level picture is very common.
That's right. And I think that just to add to that, certain things do not touch Netskope, right? Because, again, certain data does not flow through Netskope because of certain SSL pinning or SSL issues. Right. So that goes to a firewall. So you have to take the data from the firewall, correlate it with another log source. So again, unfortunately, again, there's no single solution that does that, right? So that's why you have to have multiple sources.
Mm-hmm. So last question, Max, again, you I was waiting for a trigger and Krishna gave me the trigger about API. And I promised you before that I won't use SolarWinds, but now we have Mimecast. I'm going to use Mimecast. So API security, right? And it's been talked about a lot, and we've talked about supply chain, but now it seems to be much, much more prevalent than ever, right? So from a CISO standpoint, I mean, how does these connections between these various software entities, both within an enterprise as well as through the supply chain, how does that manifest itself, and where does API security continue to play a bigger role in your organization?
No, it definitely plays a bigger role, and I think it's going to play a bigger role. I think for our footprint that we are, again, we don't write APIs. We leverage APIs that the third-party vendors provide. But from the supply chain perspective, it's definitely something that we need to look even further to make sure that a proper API security is applied, because, you know, as you can see, that can be used as attack vectors, and that can have lasting effects on an enterprise, even though you don't leverage those APIs directly. Somebody else might and get access to your data indirectly. So absolutely something that the supply chain, you know, even though it was talked about before, I think it's going to raise us to a higher point of, you know, of scrutiny, I guess, from my perspective.
So Krishna, again, turning that to you, right, from a product organization standpoint, right? Mm-hmm. How does this change the way of how you do testing, how you do attestation, and how do you qualify not just the Netskope product, but the ecosystem with which customers use Netskope?
Yeah, no, I know we pay a lot of attention. From any of the services that we procure and use within our product to ensure that the risks, like what are the risks involved in bringing such services inside, right? And at the same time, we are also very, very particular, because as a solution provider, right, we are also having a lot of secrets that provide access to customers' data. So how we protect that secrets, and what kind of processes we put in place as to how the secrets are protected, as well as any access to those secrets are audited. There's a lot of scrutiny put into that, and a lot of like auditability of access to that is of very high importance for us.
Great. Again, thanks for your time. This has been a great conversation, and stay safe, and looking forward to future conversations.
Thank you, Ashmir. Thank you, Krishna.
Thank you, Max. Yeah.